creating a culture of love. Would I dare be bold to say that everyone is stuck in their past?
How have I changed from my past self? You know, what are certain things that I could learn from my past self? You know, you could still learn from your past self.
If you live too much in the past, they say you're stuck in this depressive state. But if you live too far out in the future, you're living in anxiety.
You know, a lot of people, their days are just spent on autopilot, and so they're doing things that they already know how to do. They're not having a lot of first-time experiences.
Dr. Benjamin Hardy, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for flying into Santa Monica to visit us. And we like to start off with a bang, right? And from my experiences, looking at like what's happened in my life, being stuck, and just looking at even what's happened through the pandemic, through where we're at now, and the fear-based, I say, mongering on the media, would I dare be bold to say that everyone is stuck in their past?
I think that we all can be stuck in a past. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It depends on how you look at the past. But yeah, I think that a lot of people are definitely stuck in the past. They may even be stuck in a future, you know? Mm-hmm. So like in psychology, there's a concept called default future, which is just the future that you most anticipate or most expect, even if it's not the one you want. So yeah, I think most people are pretty rigid in how they view their own future, and especially how they view their own past.
And it's interesting because I've been starting to do a lot of this work because I'm very future oriented. I'm very vision forward.
For sure.
But sometimes, you know, my coach would say, yeah, but what are the metrics of you getting there? You're missing what's in the gap. Like, I know where you want to go and you're here, but what's the thing in between? And sometimes it's like, I don't know. Am I avoiding it? Is that an avoidance mindset toward not really reaching out for the future? And one would say, are you living in the future or living from the future?
Yeah.
What would be the difference between those two things?
I'm much more of a live from the future kind of person. So get connected to your future self, the person you want to be, and let your future be the filter for every choice you make right now. So like, you know, get clear on, you know, as clear as you can. It takes time, but get as clear as you can on that future. And then that literally determines what you say yes and no to now. So that's more living from it. Whereas living to it, in my mind, means you're taking your current situation and maybe even what you've done in the past and saying, based on where we're at now, here's where we should go. And that kind of just leads you to doing more of the same. That's what we call 2X. You know, that's just a linear path, and it's honestly, in my mind, an inaccurate view of time and how time works. But yeah, when you can live from the future, then the future can be imagined. And Albert Einstein said imagination is more important than knowledge. And so if you live from the future, you've got way more options. If you're living toward the future, then you're only starting here.
Interesting. So 2X, obviously that linear progression, all of a sudden you're going through life and you're like, wow, I'm 65 and nothing has really changed. Nothing has really happened. I've kind of hit some goals, but I'm not where I want to be. And now the difference with that is to 10X this, exponential growth. We know about like compounding effect. What are measurements or metrics or questions we could ask ourselves to actually say, hey, am I 2Xing my life right now? Or how do I exponentially jump toward this future or actually bring it closer to me?
So I'll use you as an example because I just am getting to hear your story a little bit. So what was the question you asked yourself? And I'll answer the question. I'm not pushing this up on you. But like you went 10X when you left that job and gave away your book of business.
Yeah.
So what were you asking yourself when you were in that financial advising situation that you were not having fun, you know, you weren't enjoying it? And what, you know, how did you get clear that this is what you want to do and then let go of conceivably a really lucrative situation? To me, that's exactly what 10X is. And so what was what allowed you to even get open to this idea?
So there was a couple of things. One, I started foreseeing my future relationship with my family to be, because I didn't have one at the moment. And I thought, well, why do I want to go through the motions of getting married and having kids if potentially I'm going to end up divorced with my kids hating me because I am in a situation that I hate, which means I'm going to be an angry, unhappy person.
So that's the default future. You were already projecting it.
Exactly. Oh,
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'm thinking I'm like foreseeing it, but I'm okay.
Anyways, keep going. I'm just listening.
And then the other thing was like, what's the worst thing that can happen? A, I stay in this, which was that projected future, or B, I take the risk and see what's going to happen and realize that, hey, Ruben, take inventory. I've always been self-employed. I've always been able to generate money at anything I've ever done. So really, is there a huge risk to finally betting on myself in this new career and go running for it? And I just basically said, you got to do this now. It's now or never.
Yeah.
And that was it. And
I mean, would you say that before that you weren't as honest with yourself? I mean, I don't know. It sounds to me that's insane self-honesty.
I would say yes, because I would lie to myself thinking, okay, I want to be this financial guy making millions of dollars in a suit and tie and having everything I want. But then I'm like, wait a minute, I did that in my 20s. If you want to take Einstein, what is repeating? Definition of insanity?
Yeah.
I would have just been in the same thing, and I would have found myself at some point probably, let's call it bankrupt again and miserable again. So there's probably a moment of clarity that said, hey, I need to do this now or else I'm going to be stuck in the situation. And it was choosing love in that moment, because I could have sat on fear and been comfortable and tried to figure it out when I got to the actual problem.
So this is where I'm not trying to turn the conversation.
It's fine. No, go ahead.
So my initial thought was super self-honesty. I love the quote, all progress starts by telling the truth. Mm-hmm. And I think about you were doing what you wanted, but you connected it with love. So I want to understand that so that I can, so when you say you chose love, for me, I was thinking you chose honesty and you chose what you want. And maybe that is love, but tell me, what do you mean when you say you chose love?
So when I say I chose love, I'll walk it back to saying I'm trying to simplify life as much as possible. We operate out of love or we operate out of fear. And humans are meaning-making machines, right? We make meaning out of everything, whether it's, mysticism or astrology or whatever. It doesn't matter. Like, we just like to make stuff up. And that can all fall under two pillars. So if we're saying, hey, I'm so blissful right now and I'm feeling boisterous and joyful, okay, you're feeling love. Or if we're over here, I'm anxious and worried and not enough and I don't belong and what is my purpose? We're in fear. So I'm just trying to simplify. Okay, if I could keep it super simple in my head, I don't create meanings. I'm trying to minimize my storytelling or my lying to myself. And in that moment, I said fear would have been staying comfortable, not realizing that I didn't know the unknown was an opportunity because I was comfortable in what I knew, right? In finance, I make my phone calls, I take my meetings, I do the things, I make money. And you can see the life because you've seen people do it over and over again. In art, I had no idea what that was. I didn't go to school for it. I don't know what the business of art is. I hate this saying, but they're like starving artists and all that kind of mentality. So you can look at that and see that as fear-based, but I saw it as all opportunity. I'm like, let me take my 20 years of business, of everything I learned out in life, and just apply it to art and actually unleash the artist that I was always supposed to be and just listen to myself and my gut. So I was radically honest with actually saying this is who I'm supposed to be and then just diving in and taking the choice.
It's cool. Yeah, it reminds me of, Michelangelo, where he said to the Pope, how did the Pope ask him, how'd you make the David? And he just said, I took away everything that's not the David, right? But that's the self-honesty. That's stripping away everything that is stopping you, from being simple, from really just doing what you most want or doing what you most love or doing whatever you feel is love. So I think that's like honestly a great fundamental component of going 10X. And to me, 10X is more of a qualitative shift than something quantitative. Like you going from financial advisor to artist, that's mostly like a shift in the quality of who you are and how you're living, but it can open up ridiculous doors if you're being a lot more honest with yourself. And often it is doing something from potentially even a seemingly impossible future, and not knowing how to do it. It's definitely not what you were doing in the past. It's not based on security. Yeah. It's very much based on, either love, freedom, choice, however you want to look at it.
Yeah. And then the other thought could have been I could have even backpedaled more and gone back into medicine or something in PT or personal training.
That would have definitely been security based, right?
Yeah. Because I studied that for another 10 years. So it's interesting. And how often do we fall into these patterns? And what are questions we can ask ourselves?
Yeah.
right? What are questions we can ask ourselves on the daily? Let's just take our normal day to day, and you just see yourself. I'm on autopilot. I'm going to this job I hate. Why am I doing that?
Yeah, I think that asking yourself, am I doing this out of security, or using your language, or am I doing this out of love? You talked about doing something you either fear. What was the two you said? You're either doing something you fear or
Love.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, so in psychology, we would talk about either you're doing something out of avoidance or approach. Everything is either avoid or approach. And so typically a lot of what we do is because of the future we fear, and so we're doing things out of avoidance based. Maybe you're staying in that job because you're avoiding having those hard conversations with yourself. And so I think a good framing or a good filter is, am I doing this out of security? Am I doing this because I'm actually avoiding something real? I could ask myself the same thing with my kids, right? Is like, am I having this conversation because I'm trying to avoid something from happening, or am I doing it because I want to get closer? I've heard one of my friends said that in every social situation you're in, you're either trying to connect or trying to escape. Like literally in every situation, you're either trying to connect, which would be obviously an approach, or you're trying to escape, which is an avoid. And so if you're just honestly in any situation you're in, if most of what you're doing is to avoid either connecting with yourself, connecting with your future self, connecting with someone else, then you're probably going backwards, or you're operating from your past, and you're going in a security mode.
Wow, it's interesting, because if we really start looking at what are the habits we're doing every single day to avoid our lives? I always say, are you a player in the game of your life, or are you spectating on the bench? Because a lot of us are like, tomorrow. And then when tomorrow comes and you're on your deathbed, what happened? And we say today is someday. What do you really have to lose? But the opportunity now to avoid is greater than ever. There's 1,000,001 TV shows and books, and let's read the next self-help book to get the information, but we never actually apply it. So what is the thing that takes us to that next level of like, you know what? I took the knowledge. I have 10x information in my head, but I actually have to act upon it. I have to execute.
Yeah. So one is like, are you operating from the future, or are you operating from the past or present? For me, if I'm not operating from the future, if I'm not letting the future that I want, even if it's an imperfectly framed future, like if I'm not operating from the future, then I'm probably operating out of fear or security. And that doesn't mean that I'm not in the present. I'm just operating from the future I want. And so if you're not doing that, then you're probably paralysis by analysis. You're overthinking it. I mean, even if I can go get information, but is it information that's relevant to what I'm trying to accomplish, or am I just gathering information that I might use 10 years from now? And so we definitely can deceive ourselves into thinking we're being productive when really we're just avoiding doing what is the next best step. So yeah, I mean, is this something that's going to dramatically move you towards your future? Not just maybe a little bit, but is this going to like really take you forward? And for me, like I look at my time, I mostly look at like days and weeks. Like if I'm living today, even if I just take a few steps, I can take insane steps in a single day, and I try to actually squeeze or stretch as much as I can in a single day. It doesn't always look the same. I mean, sometimes that might just be me hanging out with my kids, but I find that if I'm actually living, operating for my future, and like really like stretching it, I can do more in a day than I used to do in like months, just because I'm doing what you're saying. I'm actually like I'm living.
Yeah. That's when people probably ask you, because I've heard this too, is like, how do you do so much? How do you get so much done? Or that quote, have you heard of Beyonce's got 24 hours just like you? So it's like, so being just uber present on it and really focusing on these exponential leaps and moments and bounds. You could be super present with your child, but I could still be creating like all this other awesomeness over here and winning at both things.
Yeah. I really using the language of that book. I like one of the things that I've learned and I've been messing with lately is I actually, you told me a story before we started filming, and so it might be even worth hearing your riff on this. But I really do pursue impossible goals now.
Mhm.
Like impossible is a lens for me that like, so that's one lens. This is like, do I think that this is possible? And certainly if like, there's a difference between having hope and just wishing. Like wishing mean like I can wish for something that like is fundamentally like, I could wish that the sky turns green. You know what I mean? But like hope, a big aspect of hope is like, it might not be very conceivable, but like it's within the realm of possibility, even if it seems impossible. And so for me, impossible is a great lens because it gets me out of operating from my past and it gets me really thinking about just the few things with huge upside. It also gets me thinking about how can I involve other people? Like I don't have the answer. And so I need to turn to help. You know, when the student is ready, the teacher appears, or like when the why is strong enough, you'll find the who, you'll find the right people. And so I also, you know, and I know you told me about like your 6-week journey with those signs. And so it might be interesting to break that down. But one of the framings I go for is at least in certain contexts, at least with my work. But I mean, I think I could probably apply it in other areas too. Like, am I going for something in the short run that I feel is impossible? And that really helps me to stop doing most of the things I'm doing right now. Because most of the things I'm doing right now are very marginal. Like they're not really doing much. Honestly, most of what I'm doing is busy. It's not really productive. It's not transformative.
Oh,
It's linear.
Yeah.
So going for big impossible stuff really gets me out of my past self.
So I'm hearing a couple of things here because I'm an entrepreneur and a creative. Like this language applies very well. And in some of my poetry and my work, I talk about hopes and wishes. And like wishful thinking is one thing. And you hear people say, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I could paint like you, Ruben. I wish I can do this. I'm like, okay, well, like just go practice. Not me, but your version of that. And then like, well, I hope one day I can get as good. Being hopeful then is like, oh, you're past wishing it. Hope is maybe you're on that level. I might start practicing. And then you could dream about one day having the career. And then by doing it or writing it down, you create the goal. So we just had to lead step by step by step by step. And then now we're like, oh, and then you share it with someone, you make it accountable.
Sure.
So, but along the way, we skip a lot of those steps. So where is it that we get stuck on being just wishful all the time? And then what is it that may be holding us back? What is it about the security or the past that keeps us in the wishing zone versus turning it into an actual goal or an impossible action?
I think that, like, I love the quote, expect everything attached to nothing. You know, and so it's like, I go for impossible goals, but like, I'm not disappointed if I don't hit them. Like I'm not a failure. I'm not competing against anyone. You know what I mean? So I think often people, they don't jump to just like, let's go for this. Like see it as a test, see it as an experiment. So like I'm always testing. And I think that people get too attached to like, if I set this as a goal, or if I really go for this, or if I make it public, if I tell you about it, now all of a sudden I'm a loser if I don't do it. And I think that all that stuff is, it's just like mixed up. Like your opinion doesn't really matter about my goal, honestly, and mine doesn't matter of yours. Yeah. And so, I think that we create all these narratives and all these ideas that we're a loser if we don't do X, Y, and Z, and so I think that can really mix us up. And so I mean, I go for things that are impossible. Me and my team ultimately decide it. We decide one or two things. Even this month, we're going for something impossible. Last month we achieved one thing that did not look realistic. Like we had a goal for like a 4-month goal, and we're like, no, we're just gonna do it this month. We achieved one of them. The other one we didn't. Like we literally like. We made an inch of progress towards the mile we went for. Yeah. But that inch would never have happened if we hadn't been going for it. And so like we have fun. I think a lot of it's gamifying it, having fun with it, not being attached, but being committed. You can be hyper committed to something and not attached. And we are committed. Like once you get really committed, then you start really looking and finding those new pathways. You start being a lot more flexible. But it's all progress. You know, like I'm not comparing myself with you. I'm comparing myself only to my former self. Yeah. Is all I'm doing is comparing myself with my past self. I can look back on where I was a week ago and be shocked. And that's my measuring stick. I have an internal reference frame, not an external one. And so, yeah, I just think a lot of people, their reference frames are outside of themselves. They're comparing themselves with other people. The opinions of other people really matter. And even just false forms of failure. Like I don't think failure really exists. So I think that our emotions, it's literally emotions. I mean, even when it comes to working, you know, I do creative work, and as a writer, we torture ourselves, but it's not the work that's hard. It's how you feel about the work that makes it hard. And so literally it's all psychology. It's all emotions.
There is so much right there. Because living from expectation, that's something that I find myself to have an issue with because I am so vision forward and looking at that. And one of the things I realize is like, okay, if I'm living in expectation, it's my own expectations, not I've been able to release expectations of others because that was another bane of my existence that I'm beyond.
It's a great thing. That's a great thing to release.
But still, I have my own expectations and realizing, did I actually make the commitments and the agreements prior to attaching to the expectation? So I'm stuck on this expectation, but I never really attached myself to the commitments and agreements that I was doing to get to that point because the expectation is just the end byproduct. It's really the consistency or the commitment to do the things ahead of time. So I've been really working on that because a lot of it's like, oh, I'm going to manifest, like I have a goal, the Olympics, they're coming to LA. I want opening ceremony on a love sculpture. I want the athletes to come out. That to me is an impossible goal, but I see that it is possible, right? I have no idea how I'm going to get there. So I need to figure out everything in between to take those steps moving forward to that. Because I could scream it on this microphone to you and on the top of the
tell them all. Someone's going to hear it and they're going to help you get there.
Hey, anybody, send them my way. Olympics. No, for sure. But that's why I say it a lot. But in that notion of that, some of what you were saying is like it's tied to self-worth and looking at when we earlier you were saying we get stuck in that. It's like
totally.
Now we're starting to do that, but what if we get stuck in the past of like, I had a huge win last year and this year I've done nothing, and then we get stuck on that past story and all of a sudden we're like, we're going backwards because we're not going forwards.
Yeah, I never look at it that way. Like, even if, like, let's just compare me to where I was a week ago. Let's just say everything fell apart, even my business, and I went bankrupt and got divorced over the last week, like whatever it is, you know what I mean? I am way ahead of where I was a week ago. Like, in terms of experience, knowledge, like, you can't actually go backwards. Yeah, you can reframe the past and keep transforming it, which is a super valuable skill, but like, I'm always ahead of my past self. Even if, like, call it I made all sorts of mistakes and lost everything, my past self certainly didn't know what I know now. And so like I don't think that that's I just don't look at it that way. I don't think it's helpful. I also look back and I recognize I'm not my past self, but I also have huge respect for my past self. But I always feel that I'm ahead of my past self.
Where does regret play into that? Because I hear a lot of people like, I regret this or doing that, and we get stuck in that pattern, right?
I think that is living in the past. Like, literally, you're still holding on, and like I'm a huge believer that you can continuously reframe and recreate the past. Like, I think we do it all the time, but that's like the wish that you could change, like what you did, or how it went. You can't change that. You can change what it means. You said we're a meaning-making machine. You can change your relationship to it. You can change what you do with it. You can be better, not bitter. And so ultimately, it can be a thing that you don't regret. You also recognize you're not that same guy. But the regretting piece is like you're still attached to what you thought it was supposed to be, And so you're actually still like living back there and wishing it could have been different rather than doing something different because of it. So yeah, I mean, I feel like that's a false attachment. That you're attached to whatever your attachment was. You're still holding on to it.
Because sometimes I like to tell people, I'm like, you got to let that go. Like, work on it, whatever it is. I'm not here to give you that answer, but just stop saying that phrase because there's nothing we can do about it. There's
a lot you can do about it, but there's nothing you can do about that. I mean,
actual moment. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot you can do with it. You're not defined by it. You define it.
Yeah.
You define what it means. I think that's something that, quote unquote successful people do as well is no matter what happens, they flip it into something interesting. It's like, you lose that campaign. All right, cool. I'm going to turn this into a new story, And so it's like, no matter what happens, the business falls apart. All right, what are we going to flip that into? What are we going to turn it into? We're going to flip it into something useful, into something valuable. So yeah, I just think that's, in the present, you have a lot of power, like when I was 16 years old, I got in an insane car crash. My mom literally got thrown from the car and almost died. She got thrown 50 feet from the car, and
Damn.
Yeah, no, it was rough. Like literally seeing my mom in that situation. My two brothers were in the car, but there's something I massively learned from this experience, which was, so my mom got life flighted to a hospital, and me and my brothers got taken in an ambulance to a different hospital that was more local.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sitting there laying on a bed in a hospital, and a police officer comes in and says, "Which one of you has been?" I'm 16 years old. I was the driver. I said it was me. So I get up, I look down at my pillow, there's hair all over my pillow. And he said, "You're in shock, your hair's falling out, don't worry about it." But he sits with me and he's saying, he first explains the situation. It was a construction situation where it was a 2-lane highway. In the middle, like the middle lane had a bunch of barriers.
Mm-hmm.
And then once the barrier stopped, I went to get over, and our car fell into dirt and rubble. Like there was no road there, and I was going like 70, and it was raining, and so I tried to get back onto the road, and we started spinning and flipping, and and so he explained to me the situation. First, he said, I want to let you know this wasn't your fault. He said the person who was supposed to be looking at the construction site and make sure it was fine didn't show up tonight. And so there was 150 yards of construction barriers that were missing, that a truck had knocked over. Damn. And so there was 150 yards of missing construction barriers, and the person who was supposed to come check the site no-showed tonight. And so he was explaining to me the situation, but then he said, "Look, I don't know if your mom's alive." And it didn't look good. She ended up being in a coma for like 3 weeks. But he's like, "You have to make a decision right now. You got 2 younger brothers." He's like, "This could destroy you." He's like, "This could define you." There's a quote in a book by Peter Levine. Peter Levine is a trauma expert. And he said that trauma isn't what happens to you. It's what you hold inside in the absence of an empathetic witness. So it's what you hold inside in the absence of someone who can empathetically help you reframe it, help you look at it from a new angle. And so he really helped me to realize I have a choice. Either the past can define me, or I can define the past. I can define this moment. And it's not like I walked away like fully empowered and like Tony Robbins, I wasn't like on top of the world. I was still sitting there.
You got up in your power pose.
Yeah, it's not like I walked away. I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm going to fly out of here with my cape." No, I mean, we were still sitting there, and my mom was still potentially dead. But what I mean by that is like, it's not the present that defines you. I mean, it's not the past that defines the present. It's the present that defines the past. And so I just think that always remembering that in the present, you have huge amounts of agency about how you approach it, what you can do.
Yeah. Wow. Just quickly, what was the recovery for all of you? How's your mom after that?
Yeah. She was in a coma for 3 weeks. She had to get all of her hair cut because she had ragdolled essentially, and she had because our car flipped so many times, there was glass everywhere, and so she had a bunch of glass in her scalp. So they had to literally buzz her head. She had to wear a body suit that kept her body
rigid.
Her spine is still like this. She survived though.
Yeah.
She felt like for herself that she had a near-death experience. So she felt like she had died, and she met God and told God she wanted to raise her 3 sons. And so she came, and she said, "Can I please live and raise my sons?" And she felt like God said yes. And so she survived, and, my younger brother, we were already in a pretty crazy state, because at that point in time, my dad was an extreme drug addict. He was going through his phase of addiction. And so, yeah, that was just a crazy time. But I was in a state of mostly compartmentalizing, and I was apathetic. My younger brother, Trevor, absorbed everything. And so it led him to extreme depression, addiction. For me, I was very good at compartmentalizing. I just became apathetic, and I had to relearn how to feel emotion. Yeah. And so I would just go snowboarding, go skateboarding, play World of Warcraft all day. I was in that escape mode, where I was escaping reality. Escape, and so that. But she survived, and we're in a good place. But that story is just one of my reminders that the past, is either you're defined by the past, or you define the past. Either the present's in the driver's seat, or the past is in the driver's seat. For me, I let the future be the driver to the present, and I let the present be the driver to the past.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. That is powerful. And that officer that told you that.
He was one of my empathetic witnesses, man. I never met him again. Don't even know his name, but he did not have to come there, because he drove at least an hour out of his way. And like, I mean, it was a rough, one of those car accidents where like he was probably expecting my mom to die. I mean, the odds were bad. So it's like one of those ones where it's like, he gets a call. It's like, oh crap. There was a crash, car flipped, mom thrown from the car. She got life flighted. 3 boys. They're like, like, and then he goes and finds out that the construction site's like not set up and stuff. And so, I'm sure he gets calls like that all the time, but it's still one of those like rough ones where it's like, oh man, mom probably just died, 3 teenage kids, Yeah. So, and he didn't have to, he went there and he talked to me like freaking man to man, and I don't even remember. I just remember him saying, this wasn't your fault, explain the situation, and just said, you have to decide what you're going to do with this. Cause this could mess up your life.
Yeah.
And that's really what trauma is that something happens to you and then you're defined by it rather than you continuously redefining it. This is something I learned from Dan Sullivan, who we wrote 3 books together, is like, you own your experiences. They don't own you. You don't have access to my experiences.
Nope.
I can tell you about my experiences, but I'm the only one who has access to my own experiences. And so it's like, what am I going to do with those? I get to create, recreate, and continuously transform the meaning of my experiences. And when you do that, then they become insanely useful to you. They become valuable. Your past becomes a really useful asset. So, I just think that there's so much power in our past and what we do with it and what we can continue to do with it. Yeah,
and there's so much swirling in my head with this story. Again, I want to thank you for sharing that, because it's such a poignant example. And it's just like, I want to think like, what made this guy go out of his way to do this? Because he's probably seen.
He didn't have to, man.
He didn't.
He really didn't have to, and it.
And like you saying your dad was an addict, you could have easily become the addict like your dad. You could have easily spiraled down that whole path. But you're a living, walking example of like, I'm not letting this define me. Let me move forward. Although you walled up, you shelled off, and I'm looking at me and my experience, and like there was a point where I walled up and vulnerability wasn't accessible, and it wasn't about emotions. It was about being tough. And at some point we decided to choose this forward, and I think a failure is only a failure if you don't learn from it. And we're the sum of our failures, or that starts leading to our successes. So like that story is powerful. Again, thank you for sharing.
Of course, man.
But it's true. We have these defining moments. And I know you talk a lot about journaling. And I journal in my notes on my phone, but I also say a lot of my murals are my journal entries. And I put them out to the world.
Totally. I love that.
The first mural asked, who will you be? That was the question I was asking myself. And this is one of the things I want to say, like, what are specific questions or tasks or things that we can ask ourselves to, look at these defining moments, because we all have them.
Sure.
And they could be little. I think we shouldn't grade them. I think we put too much weight in certain things and either make them more or less, or I don't have a moment like you, so my moment doesn't matter.
The cool part is that your defining moments are what you do with it in the present. You're the one who defines it. You define what the moment means, like you're the meaning making machine. So you get to mark you get to define the moment, because you're the one defining it in the present. It's not defining you.
And what's the best way to start really unpacking that? You say it's journaling. Journaling is one of your major tactics of making it real or reframing it. But is there a right way? Are there other ways? People do it in meditation, on their walks, while they train. What are some key takeaways that people could do right now and say, you know what? I'm going to start journaling. I'm going to ask myself or look back into these defining moments and maybe start reframing this.
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways of looking at it. I really look at identity and time as past self, present self, future self. And so these are three realities that are all existing at once. I have a future self, that hopefully is filtering who I'm being right now. Hopefully I'm operating as my future self, right? Yeah. But I also have my past self that is someone I can continuously learn from. So for me, all of these things coexist simultaneously from a psychological standpoint. And so I think that there's lots of questions, you could ask yourself, how have I changed from my past self? What are certain things that I could learn from my past self? You could still learn from your past self. Someone once asked me, there's a really cliche question, which is like, what would you say to your 20-year-old self? Yeah. But someone flipped that question, which I thought was actually a more interesting question, which is what would your 20-year-old self say to you?
Yeah.
I think that's really interesting. So that there's a question, what would your 20-year-old self, if they could actually see you, right? What would they say to you? And you could flip that as well. What would you say to your, add 5 years, add 10 years? What would you say to your 50-year-old self if you could? What would you say to them? But also what would they say to you? What would your future self say to you? And you can just ponder that, and you can start to actually think, who do I want my future self to be? But also, how am I different from my past self? How have I evolved? What have I learned? What do I now know that they didn't know? What can I now do that they didn't do? What have I achieved that they thought was impossible? Like there's certain, your past self is extremely limited compared to you. And so like there's certain things that they thought were extremely impossible. Think back to you. Think back to you as a financial advisor.
Yeah.
Like if your financial advisor self could actually for a second see you and what you're doing right now, what would they say?
He would be mind blown. He'd say, why the hell am I wearing this suit and tie and like avoiding every aspect of my life to avoid being a financial advisor when I could be doing that?
Yeah.
And to answer that other question you asked, it's like, I would just say start sooner.
About what you would say to them?
Yeah, I wouldn't change anything. Sometimes people ask, what would you change?
Oh, I would never change anything.
And I said, if I change anything in my past, I'm not who I am right now.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know where I am right now. I could not be doing this. So like, I can't change my past. It's not even a thought that I want to do. The only thing I would ever say is like, start sooner. Analysis paralysis, like keep jumping off those cliffs, figuring it out on the way down. Those are the only things that.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I find that question, what would you say to your past self, kind of like, I've thought about it because I get asked it all the time. I'm like, I really don't know, but, here's an interesting question is what would your future self say to you? So think about it for a sec. Whatever version of your future self you want, but I'd say in 3 years from now. So it's 2026, September of 2026. I don't know where you want to be then. I don't know what your impossible goals are. I would argue it's going to be as big of leaps as you made from the financial advisor to get to here. But what does your future self say to you?
This in simple terms, the first thing they're going to say is keep going. You're on the path. Stop overthinking and just move forward. That would be like the initial, like, okay, that validates that. Then he would say, guess what? You're 2 years away from your Olympic dream and you just secured your Jordan collaboration deal.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
Boom. I love it.
Yeah.
So
that's another dream, a Jordan collab.
Michael Jordan?
Yeah. For the shoes.
Dude, you'll get it.
Yeah.
You already got the NFL one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, man. So I think that those are some really great questions. It's just like referencing your past self, referencing your future self. These are just filters for me. They're filters, they're frames. They're ways of operating in the present effectively. That's really what the past and the future are for, is to operate really usefully, powerfully in the present. You don't want to be hooked, stuck in the past with all sorts of attachments and negative emotions. And also you want to utilize the future to make shifts and honestly to move forward in your life and to make big jumps and to let go of things that no longer matter. And so, yeah, I think that those are great tools. I mean, you can do it at different time frames. You can think back on like how are you different from who you were a year ago. You could do it on how was I different 90 days ago. In the front of my journal, I have 5 questions that I just write on the front of every one of my journals. I say, where am I now? And I just write down like 5 to 8 bullets of just like, writing X book, really hanging out, focusing on my kids, whatever. I just like literally write down 5 to 8 bullets of where am I now, and then I say what are the biggest wins from the last 90 days. Just write them down. What are the biggest wins I want for the next 90 days? And then I say, who's my future self 12 months from now? Who's my future self 36 months from now? And on those last 2, I only give myself 3 bullets. So like future self 12 months from now, I only got 3 bullets. What are the 3 most important things I see for my future self? And, I love the quote from Jim Collins, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have 0. So it's like, if I got 3 priorities for my future self 12 months from now, what are those 3 priorities? If I got 3 priorities for my future self 36 months from now, so I got 3 years, what are those 3 priorities? What's that focus? What's that filter? So it's kind of fun because I've been asking myself those questions in the front cover of my journals, and the journals I use, I can fly through them. Like they're just lines, but I go through them like one or two a month. But I scribble, like I draw pictures in my journals, but I can go back and just look at those snapshots, go back 5-8 years and just reopen it. And it's like almost like a little one sheet of what I was thinking about back then.
Yeah.
And so those are some fun questions.
Hey, I'm saying it right now. I'm going to start doing that. I love that. Because there's some purpose to it. And what I'm really hearing is just realize, doing the studies, being in the business, doing all that. When you give people too many choices, we get lost in opportunity. So if we're giving ourselves too many choices, we're lost and then become avoidant or analysis paralysis.
They call it paradox of choice.
Yeah, right?
That's why people don't get married these days. It's because there's literally too many options.
Yeah.
You just know that I could, I'll just find someone else, find some better fit, on this app, that app. And so people don't, paradox of choice. We have too many choices, and so we make zero.
That is why all those apps, and they keep making more apps, and they're getting more niched down. It's like, okay, like if I get to find the perfect unicorn, maybe this is the unicorn app. And then you're like, no, I'm going to go over here. Yeah. The grass is greener where you water it. But that is interesting. And in the thing you were just saying right now, past, present, future, one of the things I noticed, like if you live too much in the past, they say you're stuck in this depressive state.
Sure.
But if you live too far out in the future, you're living in anxiety. And both of those take you out of the present. But totally. The way you're describing it is very energetic, and it seems very simple. It's not super daunting.
It's all in the present. I'm letting the future dictate who I am in the present, and in the present, I'm continuously reframing, rewriting, honestly, empowering my past. Mm-hmm. And so it's all happening in the present. My past isn't driving my present. My present's driving my past. And then my future is just shaping who I'm being, how I'm operating, the choices I'm making, the things I'm letting go of because it doesn't fit. So it's all in the present. The past and future are just simply tools. Yeah. The more you have, and I consider it mastery. You either have mastery over your past or your past has mastery over you. And you've got mastery over your future, or you don't. And so for me, mastery about the future means you're operating from the future, not toward it. And mastery over the past means you're operating from the present towards that past. And so for me, it's not like I'm living in the past or in the future. Yeah. I'm living from the future.
Which is all one now. And
it's all right now, man.
You're just uber present.
Dude, I mean, the thing is when people say don't live in the past, don't live in the future, like they're in a psychology term, like you can't delete the past or the future. Like that is what makes us humans is that we have memories and we have goals. Yeah. Like, that's what makes us intelligent beings. Like, we just sometimes don't know how to handle them. And a lot of it just comes down to like a concept that's called psychological flexibility. You have to be psychologically flexible to look at the past and say, I had a view of that, but that view may not be the only view, right? Like there may be another way of looking at it. And I'm open to the idea that maybe I wasn't looking at it the best way. And so you gotta be flexible to like change your mind, but when you change your mind or when you change the frame, you change your emotions around it. And so you have to have emotional flexibility to not be dogmatic about your view. Like I don't need it to be that story. Like maybe my dad wasn't a bad guy, You know what I mean? Like, but if I hold to that story, if I'm dogmatic and I want to be right, then I'm rigid. Then I'm stuck. Then I really have no options. Now I've got no agency. I've got no pathway. But if you're flexible, then you can say, you know what? There's another way of looking at this. There's another angle, and with that other angle, there's a lot more options. There's a lot more freedom. There's a lot more potential. And so, I think that's just a massive skill. And as you do it, your present opens up. You've got a lot more options in the present, and you can make huge leaps. I mean, if you're flexible about your future, you don't have to go for something linear. You don't have to go for something realistic. You don't have to go for something that's the next step. You can go way over there and start using that future as the filter. Oh, now I'm going to go a totally different direction in the present. But, so you've got way more options in the present than you think, man. You've got like 360-degree options if you can be flexible with it.
So as we age, because you just talked about psychological flexibility, our bodies get less flexible, we get less rigid, we're more stuck in our ways, and we notice as generations get older, right, we learn new things. My generation is different than my parents' generation, grandparents, different than my 2.5-year-olds, a whole other generation, right? How do we practice that flexibility? What's the best way to do it? Like sometimes, I can say, hey, Latino culture, someone in their 60s, 70s will be like, psychology? Pfft, therapy? That's for crazy people. That's for sick people. That's not for me, right? That's a way of being. That's a rigid thought process. Are there things to enhance this flexibility? Like if I stretch my leg, I'm going to stretch my hamstring, right? Increase my mobility. What can we do to increase psychological flexibility?
Yeah. I'll share with you that. I freaking love that question. I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Would you say you're more or less rigid than you were 3 years ago? Think about it. Like, I'm talking not physically, although hopefully you can maybe stretch, but as a person with the options, the potentials, how you go about things, just yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Are you more or less flexible? Or you could say rigid, but like, I'll just say rigid. Emotionally, are you more or less rigid than you were 3 years ago?
Less.
Yourself.
I'm less.
So why do you say that? How could you be less rigid than your past self? What did you do that makes you different from your past self in that way?
That's a great quote. Well, now I'm seeking the knowledge. I'm asking more questions. I'm getting more educated in the opportunities. I didn't even know some of this lingo in my couple years ago.
Sure.
So that's
see, you're a lot more informed than your past self.
Yeah.
Totally. So I mean, that's one right there. Is like. So here's a super crucial key, and this is a really counterintuitive idea. We've already talked about you're not your past self.
Mm-hmm.
You're also not your present self. Seriously, you're not your present self. You're also not your future self. So now it's like, well, who am I? But like, this is a really important thing is realizing that you're not the same. Like, so one of my favorite psychologists, his name is Dr. Daniel Gilbert. He gave a TED Talk called The Psychology of Your Future Self. It was on the Made Stage, 2014. But he says that your current self or who you are right now is as fleeting as the present moment. So like, I know that I'm not going to be the same next week, And so like, I don't need to overly prove myself right now. I know that I've got a lot to learn even from this conversation. Mm-hmm. Seriously. And then, after this conversation, when I'm taking an Uber back to my hotel, literally in like 30 minutes, like I can look at this conversation and I can learn a lot about it. And that person driving to the Uber in 30 minutes is going to look differently at this situation and be like, okay, like I can learn a lot from that. And so that's like a great way of doing it. Like if you think about sports, I know that you're interested in like the NFL, like watch your tape, like actually watch it, study it. You don't need to be mad at your past self, but like study the dang tape, like learn from it, like actually like be better. That's a huge part of what they call deliberate practice. And so like actually study whatever your tape is, develop mastery, like actually watch what you're doing and learn from it rather than avoid it. Like sometimes I want to like avoid watching this interview. You know what I mean? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm like, I don't want to see that. Like, I don't want to be ashamed, but like, what if I just directly expose myself, right? Expose myself and be open to feedback. That's going to be an amazing thing for psychological flexibility. That's going to do amazing things. And so I think that's a huge one. It's just recognizing that you can learn from your past. You're not defined by it. But also it takes huge flexibility to reframe. So like, however, if whether you're happy or not about a situation, actually ask yourself, what's a different way of looking at this? What do I not know? Like, and ask other people. Say, here's how I'm looking at this situation. It could be a business deal you're dealing with. It could be just honestly a relationship you have with someone or a decision you're making. Share, just be open. This fits with all progress starts by telling the truth. Not needing to be right. Brene Brown said, rather than trying to be right, try to get it right.
Yeah.
And so if you're just trying to get it right, then you're open to like what you just said, asking more questions, being a lot more open. So I just think practicing getting new perspectives, practicing, but the other one that really helps flexibility is pursuing things that you don't know how to do. So like not, that fits with going for the impossible. Like rather than already having the linear path up ahead of you, like you with that Michael Jordan thing, right? Like you don't necessarily know how you're going to do it, but that's why that will increase the heck out of your flexibility to try to figure out how to do that. Yeah. Like, because you don't yet know how. And I think if you committed to going for that, then it would lead you to, you would meet new people, you'd find new things, you'd ask new questions that right now you just don't have. And so pursuing things you don't know how to do typically is going to get you out of your habit, out of your current assumptions, out of your way of doing things. A lot of people, their days are just spent on autopilot. And so they're doing things that they already know how to do. They're not having a lot of first time experiences. Yeah. Whereas in your 20s and stuff, your teens and your 20s, you're doing a lot of things for the first time. Then you hit 30 and a lot of psychologists, even William James, who's like the father of American psychology, He believed people's personalities became solidified at age 30. It's not true, but that's usually around the time when people stop trying new things. And so like then the grooves in their brain just get really intense. And so if you're always doing stuff that you don't know how to do and you're having to figure it out, let go of old beliefs, old ideas, and trying new things and seeing yourself do things you didn't think were possible dramatically increases your flexibility. And so, I mean, there's so many things. Continue to study things you've never done. I mean, it's just, it's a worthwhile pursuit. But for me, everything still like dials back to your relationship to your past, present, and future, because that's just where we live. And so if you're constantly reframing that and constantly operating from a new future, then you're going to be very flexible in the present. You're going to continuously have new options, new choices, not necessarily show up the exact same way you did the day before. You'll be more informed.
Then you're not married to your identity. If you really look at all this, and sometimes we're like, who am I? What am I? What is my identity? I'm Ruben. I'm XYZ, Latino, male, straight, married, father, artist. Like, now you're like stuck in that way, but like, I like to say, can't we all just be human and then start from there and have an experience? But then if identity is like who I was, who I am, who I'm going to be, but now, there's no definition of what that identity is. It's just being.
Identity is two things. It's your story and it's your standards. The story is the story you're telling, right? It's the story of your past self, present self, and future self, and it's the standards that you're most committed to. As people, we're all committed to things. But if you honestly look at the standards you have, and by the way, my preference of saying story and standards is actually framing and filtering. It's how you frame things, and it's also what you filter. What you filter is what you pay attention to, and it's also what you say yes and no to. And so like, it is powerful to have like, higher and specific filters. Like I said, I have my future self is filtering what I say yes and no to today, but also I could look back on like, what were my past self's filters and frames? You know what I mean? Like a lot of them were a lot more rigid, like a lot more of a narrow frame and not a well-defined filter. Like I said yes to a lot of things I shouldn't have said yes to.
Yeah.
I had low standards. And so, but I agree with you that you don't want a fixed identity. And you definitely don't want to overly fix. Well, and this is what happens is that people, they overly fix the identity of their past self and their present self, and this is what a fixed mindset is, and then they push that off into the future, and they don't let their future self have a lot of flexibility either.
Where you're trying to mold it and shape it into what they think.
This is it. Whereas your future self's gonna be totally different. They're gonna have so many better perspectives than you do. So yeah, identity is powerful. I actually, back in the day, I wrote a book called Personality Isn't Permanent. Personality is something that people overly worry about, but personality is the surface. It's kind of like the effect. And honestly, in my opinion, personality really, like, it's cool. It's good to have a personality, but it's so variable. It's so flexible. And identity should be as well, but identity is much more powerful. Identity drives personality. And so identity is something powerful to use, but you're dead on. It's not something to get fixed on. It's not something to overly, it will change over time, and you want to use it as a tool. You don't want to be used by it. Just like anything else, you want to utilize it. You don't want to be used by it.
Yeah. No, that's powerful. Thank you. One last context or thing that I'm looking at identity is when we as humans keep putting on different masks. So we could show up differently.
That's more personality.
Got it. So that's personality.
Yeah, they even say personality, another word for personality is persona. And persona is like the mask you put on, like if you're acting in a play. But anyways, go ahead. Ask the question though, please. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Every time we're putting on a mask, like I try to ask myself, well, who will I be? What do I need to do now to become who I've never been? And when I give talks now and I do different things, I have this whole perfectionism thing and what am I going to be perceived? And like I write my words and I fall in love with my words. And then my buddy's like, bro, you embody this. Just embody it and show up. Which then is like, then my embodiment is then my identity. That's what it should be, the embodiment of everything I'm being.
Yep.
So now the personality is these masks of perfection or how I'm being perceived or absorbed. And that's what that would be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of just take off the mask. I mean, we'll all be wearing them. It's, I'm here in a role. You're in a role. We're having this conversation. And so it's not bad to be in a role, but I like what you're saying, because when you're just operating from a place of being, operating from a place of identity, then you don't need to overly make sure that the mask fits. Like you're just showing up. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so it's a lot more free. It's coming from the inside out rather than the outside in. And so and if you're just being, and especially if you're operating from where you want to go, you're not going to be looking the same way as the mask you were wearing yesterday. I mean, you took a lot of those masks off, but also if you're not wearing the mask and you're not letting the mask dictate you, then you don't need to worry about how it's perceived, which all of those fears, all those external reference points, all of those worries about how it's perceived literally stops you from it stops you from just going for it. It stops you from connecting. You're actually still trying to escape through that mask. And so when you just let all that go, then you're not attached to how it's going to show up. And honestly, it's like, that's when you can start making the connections. That's when you can start going for the impossible. That's when you can start trying things and not being worried if it fails. You can go have that conversation. You go for the Jordan thing, you know, and now you're just in a state of learning. You're open rather than closed. Putting on the mask immediately closes you. And so, yeah, you're just not worried about how it's perceived, and you're the one defining your own experiences. I'm going to learn from it. Yeah, I went and tried that thing, and I was really open. I really tried, and you know what? Totally it flopped, you know? But actually, no, I'm going to actually decide that I learned a lot from that, you know? And I'm the one who owns that experience, you know? Like,
totally.
And so I just think I think it's living from a lot more open and a creative space. Whereas the masks are you're trying to be what you think that they want you to be, or trying to fit some frame, and that just blocks everything.
So unmask your future self.
Yeah, man. Let your future self shape everything you're doing today.
Yeah,
be your future self right now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. I love all of this. I've been diving into it, but meeting you, the way you're framing it is it's also, I feel it's very playful. Like you've got the data, you've got the research and the names to back it up, but it's just, you're kind of just throwing it out there. It's very playful. So
I'll tell you something about that I didn't realize before. And I have to smack myself in the face every time I forget. People think that science isn't creativity. It's complete creativity. It's all framing. It's like, even just the idea of coming up with a hypothesis or asking a question is inherently like creative, you know? A lot of people think about creativity about your future, but you're just as creative and imaginative about your past. And so like, yeah, I mean, it is very playful, but it's weird because like people think that science is like, and a lot of what I'm saying is based on scientific ideas, and certainly, but like, I just think that play and creativity is a huge part of any form of work, any part of business, any part of a relationship. And so, yeah, it really is play, you know?
And it makes it more fun to learn and take in and absorb.
Yeah, man, it's a playground of ideas, and it's fun, but those ideas have impact, and you can actually do stuff with them. So, cool, man. It's fun.
Yeah, no, thank you. So, Benjamin, final question. Dr. Benjamin Hardy, there's no right answer. There's your answer. I like to preface it with that. But how would you define living a life through love?
Such a good question. I mean, I'll start by saying this. I'm gonna give some context, and then I'll give my answer. So, I have 6 kids. Our older 3 kids were first foster kids, and then we have 3 more after we adopted. We had the 3, and there is a difference. Like when I first became a parent, I had to choose. This may sound weird. I had to choose to love those kids. Yeah. You know, and so my love for them is not different from the love I have for the ones that were just like organic. But when you have a baby, when your wife goes through, like, whether, you know, our twins had to be a C-section, but like when you like go through that process of like seeing these babies come out, and like you know, I think it's my DNA, right? And so it's like you just automatically assume love. You accept it. Whereas with those first 3 kids, we didn't actually even know that we were going to get them. You know, like, is it permanent? Is it like, a lot of times with foster kids, you don't necessarily want to give them your heart, because you're like, they might get taken away and then I'm going to be shattered, right? Yeah. And my wife and I decided from the beginning that we were going to just go all in. Because we felt like for these kids, if we didn't fully love them, like, they've already gone through, like, think about them, like, they've already been taken from their parents. And so if they're in their house where these people who are watching them are guarding themselves against against my own pain if it doesn't work out, then like then these kids are essentially being rejected again.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so it's like we, for them, decided, you know what, we will take the emotional bullet of having the potential of having our heart broken, such that at least even if they get taken away, and we've got to figure out how to handle that, at least while they were with us, they had someone give them everything, like where they were fully loved and accepted. And so we were like, we're going to just go with that, and we'll deal with the other side when we get there, if that happens. Now, like I say that, but it like I still have to like learn that lesson of learning how to even like love all my kids, like actually like choosing it. Yeah. And often I don't do it. And so I just wanted to give a little bit of that context that like I feel like, number one, I don't think about love enough. And so I'm grateful for this conversation. I don't think about it enough. I value the heck out of it, but I don't think about it enough. I'll say one other thing, which is never let a goal to be accomplished become more important than a person to be loved. That's a quote that I heard that still sticks with me, is never let a goal to be accomplished become more important than a person to be loved. That's just a reference frame that comes to my mind. But now, just to answer your question, what does it mean to live through love? I think that I don't even know how to answer that question because it's so big and so beautiful. I have heard it said, there's this idea of charity, which, one definition could be like the pure love of Christ, or the pure love of God. And I've heard it said even in scripture that charity is not something that you possess; it's something that possesses you. And in order for it to be possessed by you, you've got to like give yourself to some extent away. And so to me, living through love is being possessed of the love of God, like that it possesses you. You don't possess it. It's now possessing you, and it's informing what you do. And so that's something that I definitely don't always do. But when I do it, the work is better. Like if I'm doing my work through love. Yeah. And I can say it. I've written blog posts that have been read by 20 to 50 million people. And I know that when I was doing that, I was doing it through love. Yeah. I was doing it. I was expressing myself. I was expressing God, whatever it was, but I was being real. I was being honest. I was putting my soul into it. Yeah. And not that it had to be intense, but sometimes it was. When I'm not living through love, then the play, the creativity, the funness, the ideas, those won't come. Yeah. And so that's why I'm blocked right now. I'm writing a book right now, and I don't think I'm doing it through love. And so, but also with my kids, like I know what it feels like when they're a means to my end versus, they're an end in and of themselves. Yeah. So hopefully in any of that mess, it made any sense.
That was awesome. That was beautiful. Again, I said there was no right or wrong answer.
That's
it's your
true.
Answer.
Yeah.
I've never heard it framed that way, and I love it. And the thing about charity that you say, and I say this a lot, is being in service. When we're in service, we're being just that, right? And you never know what comes back. And I mean being in service with no agenda, because sometimes we like to lie to ourselves and say, oh, we're here being in service, and it's for like, let's just call it a photo op, or because you're going to network or what. No, when you just show up, you're in service and you're out. Yeah. Tenfold, it all comes back. Just like when charity, when you're tithing, when you're doing anything. And that's how love is.
That's cool. Yeah. I love it, man.
So thank you. Where can everybody find you?
BenjaminHardy.com is my website. Check out any of the books. 10X is easier than 2X. Be your future self now. And then YouTube, Dr. Benjamin Hardy.
And maybe we'll have a book on love and all of this.
You never know, man. That'd be amazing.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for tuning in to Live Through Love. If you love this episode, you'll love this episode.